the United States Army, emerging from the long shadow of World War I, had largely neglected the grim lessons of armored warfare. An isolationist Congress, wary of foreign entanglements, had starved the military of vital resources, leaving the nation's anti-tank defenses dangerously vulnerable. As Europe plunged into a new, terrifying conflict, the lightning speed of the German Blitzkrieg through Poland and France in 1940 ripped away America's complacency. While the U.S. Army dozed, a new urgency gripped military leaders. Among the most vocal was Brigadier General Leslie J. McNair, then Chief of Staff of the 2nd Infantry Division. In June 1940, McNair railed against the Army's apathy, demanding a gun heavier than the paltry 37mm or 75mm pieces then available. He championed a radical new doctrine: tanks should not fight tanks. Instead, he argued, specialized mobile anti-tank units, armed with superior guns and capable of picking their moment to strike, could defeat hostile armored units by fire and free the friendly armored units for action against objectives which are vulnerable to them. It was, he believed, a fight analogous to shore guns against ships, with the concealed, powerful shore batteries holding a decisive advantage. This vision began to take shape. General George Marshall moved to cut the Gordian knot of anti-tank development in May 1941, spurred by the German invasion of the Soviet Union. By September, the Louisiana maneuvers showcased makeshift proto-tank destroyers, trucks crudely fitted with railroad ties or 37mm guns, which successfully stymied an entire armored corps. The psychological impact of a new, aggressive force was deemed critical. On October 7th, having disjoy, 1941, Marshall approved the renaming for anti-tank battalions to tank destroyers. The Carolina maneuvers that November provided a most startling incident when experimental self-propelled 75mm guns on half-tracks annihilated an armored regiment's bivouac. Days later, on November 27, 1941, the War Department formally ordered the activation of 53 tank destroyer battalions, placing them under the direct control of GHQ, separate from traditional Army branches. To forge this new force, the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center was established. First at Fort Meade, then at Camp Hood, Texas. Here, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew D. Bruce, a key architect of the TD doctrine, cultivated an aggressive, almost predatory fighting spirit. He envisioned the tank destroyer as a tank's number, faster, more agile, with better visibility and equal firepower, always ready to choose its moment. Bruce famously articulated the TD ethos: if Joe Louis is sitting in the corner with his back turned, you hit him behind the ear with brass knuckles. Then you get the hell out before all Harlem breaks loose. The motto, seek, strike, destroy, became their creed. Early TD equipment reflected the urgency and improvisation of the time. The M3 gun motor carriage, a half-track with a 75mm field gun, offered minimal protection and an open top, making its crew vulnerable. The M6, a Dodge truck mounting a 37mm gun, was even more precarious. Firing forward shattered its windshield, exposing the crew. And the 37mm gun itself was quickly proving obsolete against modern armor. A more robust solution, the M10 motor gun carriage, built on a Sherman chassis with a 3-inch 76mm gun and an open-topped turret, began to arrive by September had itself, 1942. As Major General George S. Patton Jr. had predicted, the M10 looked much like a tank. Blurring the very distinction the TD force was created to uphold. Training was rigorous, patterned on the British commando model. Major Gordon Kimbrell pushed his recruits through grueling schedules of night reconnaissance, stream crossings, demolitions, and street fighting. Nebraska recruit Thomas Sherman, despite his struggles with close-order drill, became a reconnaissance sergeant in the 636th TD Battalion. The 701st TD Battalion, having fired their 75mm self-propelled guns for the first time at Fort Dix in May 1942, felt ready for combat. Yet British observers noted an American overconfidence born of inexperience, a sentiment echoed by McNair, who feared the heavy losses that awaited them against the Germans of PED. Yet British observers noted an American overconfidence born of inexperience. The political imperative for immediate engagement, driven by President Roosevelt, led to Operation Torch, a hurried and often chaotic Allied invasion of North Africa in late 1942. It was a race against time, with Lieutenant General Dwight Eisenhower at the helm, aiming to threaten Rommel's rear and secure Mediterranean air superiority. On October 10th, the 701st TD Battalion embarked on transports, enduring 25 days at sea, filled with endless evacuation drills, acutely aware of the U-boat threat. On November 2nd, they finally learned their destination, Torch. Passing Gibraltar on November 6th, the men saw lighted towns for the first time in 5 months, a fleeting glimpse of normalcy before the storm. Before dawn, on November 8th, 1942, naval gunfire illuminated the Algerian coast near Oran. The landings were a maelstrom of confusion. Men tangled in rope nets, drivers assigned to the wrong transports, pontoon bridges proving barely viable for unloading under fire. Lieutenant Robert Whitsitt and Lieutenant John Eggleton led M3 tank destroyers ashore. Whitsitt's crew, part of Lieutenant Colonel John Waters' flying column, immediately engaged and placed French 75mm guns. It was an order completely at odds with TD Doctrine focused on fighting tanks. Doctrine was taking a beating, the records note, and it was not even noon yet. Initial combat against the Vichy French forces provided American troops their first experience of combat or seeing the elephant. At La Seigneur Airfield, Lieutenant Whitsitt's platoon destroyed 14 French Renault tanks at over 2,000 yards. Lieutenant Colonel Waters remarked that the sight gave his men lots of confidence. Lieutenant Arthur Edson, commanding 2nd Platoon, Company B, 701st TD Battalion, became an early hero, famously leading a solo charge in his damaged, smoking half-track through La Seigneur's in 10% flat, Crisson-Day. His notoriously unreliable radio useless to accept the surrender of hundreds of French soldiers and 90 aircraft. Oran fell, described as a city of trolley tracks, the odor of automobiles burning alcohol, wine doped with a sort of hashish, chic, French women and slovenly dressed men, dirty Arabs, and dirty straits of trolley tracks, silver, provided a surreal contrast to the grim reality. But the relative ease of these engagements against the scrub team French quickly gave way to the brutal realities of facing the Germans. Lieutenant Colonel Waters cautioned his men, "Next week we hit the Germans. Do not slack off in anything." By the end of November, 15,000 German reinforcements, including 100 tanks, had arrived in Tunisia. The arduous 700-mile journey to the Tunisian front was a baptism of mud. Unseasonably wet weather quickly turned dirt airstrips and roads into impassable muck, crippling logistics and mobility. Radios, already unreliable, were rendered useless by days of rain and little maintenance, leading to an almost complete lack of air-ground cooperation. Company C, 701st TD Battalion, under Captain Frank Redding, arrived at Beja on November 23rd. The next day, the Luftwaffe delivered a warm welcome, with Mi-109 fighter bombers and Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers strafing their assembly area. Thanksgiving Day, November 26th, brought devastation as Company C advanced to seize Medjez El Bab. American P-38 Lightnings, intended as friendly air cover, mistakenly attacked their column. Cannon and machine gun fire tore through the vehicles, knocking out every one save a single M3 and M6, setting 9 ablaze and killing 7 men, with 12 wounded. The men were shocked and demoralized, a stark and tragic reminder of the urgent need for better air-ground coordination. On December 10th, near Khartoum, Company C was alerted to an approaching German armoured column of 55 mixed vehicles, including 2 massive Mark VI Tigers. American M3 half-tracks engaged German Mark III tanks at point-blank range, with Private First Class Hermann Lenzini rapidly destroying 4 Mark III tanks. But the American 37mm and 75mm guns were largely ineffective against the 100mm frontal armour of the new Tigers, which mounted fearsome 88mm high-velocity cannons. Inexperienced American tankers, often lacking proper reconnaissance, suffered heavy losses. The subsequent withdrawal was a disaster. Vehicles became mired in the pervasive mud, one by one getting stuck and abandoned. Company C lost all its equipment, leaving Combat Command B crippled. The remaining men were relegated to military police duties. performing exhausting work to build as many functioning tank destroyers as possible out of the wrecks. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley would later describe the American performance in Tunisia as probably the worst performance of U.S. Army troops in their whole proud history. Complacency at higher echelons was rife. Major General Lloyd Fredendall, 2nd Corps Commanding General, was criticized for his excessive caution, even having engineers dig tunnels for his headquarters into ravine walls, and for issuing detailed, almost insulting instructions to his field commanders. This leadership, coupled with the dispersal of tank destroyer units, contrary to their doctrine of being held in reserve, left them exposed. Veteran tank killers began to question the competence of their generals. The German offensive from Fade Pass on February 14th, 1943, was the true crucible. As two battle groups of the 10th Panzer Division attacked, the rumble of artillery mingled with a windstorm that carried an obscuring cloud of sand. "Tigers! The Tigers are coming!" echoed through the American lines as the formidable German tanks erupted from the pass. Green tank destroyer crews ordered to open fire with their 75mm guns knew these would cause no more harm to the advancing Tigers than throwing rocks. The M3s and M6s, equipped with their 37mm pop guns, proved tragically ineffective against the heavy armor of the Tigers and the well-concealed 88mm guns. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Hightower, commanding a mobile reserve, watched his own Sherman tank catch fire, later praising the utterly fearless TD men of Company A, who stuck it out to the bitter end in a hopeless sluggy Borzid and Jebel Lasouda, led to staggering losses. The M3 tank destroyer was derisively nicknamed the Purple Heart Box. Its half-track chassis so vulnerable that if the half-track were hit by a German tank round, it was like lighting a match. The ensuing rout was marked by crowded confusion and a desperate every man for himself. Lieutenant Colonel John Waters was captured. The 1st Armoured Division lost nearly 100 tanks and almost 1,200 men. An informal battalion history of the 601st TD Battalion vividly described the scene. Confusion was king that day. There was no communication between units, no traffic control, no organisation, and no order. The retreat through Kasserine Pass was a nadir. The U.S. Army suffered more than 6,000 casualties, with 2/3 of the 1st Armoured Division's tank strength lost. Brigadier General Paul Robinette's Combat Command B held its pavé ground at Jebel el Hamra against 40 tanks, supported by the 894th TD Battalion, restoring a semblance of the line. The Kasserine Pass defeat served as a critical turning point and a brutal yet essential learning experience. Major General Orlando Ward, commanding general of the 1st Armoured Division, declared, "I now have a veteran division. Its losses have been great, but I hope before long to have it better than ever based on past experiences." The campaign challenged the notion that American troops, despite extensive maneuvers, were fully battle-ready, highlighting their initial overconfidence and ill-preparedness. It also implicitly debunked the idea that the TD force was a complete failure. Acknowledging the immense learning process it facilitated, Eisenhower reorganized Allied command, placing British leadership under Brigadier General Sir Harold Alexander in charge of ground forces and appointing Major General George Patton Jr. to lead 2nd Corps. This new leadership and the hard-won experience transformed the American forces. North Africa had been a harsh and costly proving ground, but it had forged a veteran division and forced a critical re-evaluation of tactics, equipment, and training that would inform future strategy and ultimately contribute to Allied victory. The deceptive calm that greeted Allied forces at Salerno on September 9, 1943, was a brief, cruel illusion. The 36th Infantry Division initially found few Germans, a moment of false hope that quickly dissolved into near catastrophe. This was not the smooth advance Allied planners had envisioned. It was a prelude to a desperate struggle born of underestimation and tactical missteps. German intelligence, far from being surprised, had anticipated the landings, and Field Marshal Kesselring swiftly unleashed converging divisions, 3 Panzer and 3 Panzer Grenadier divisions, to strike the nascent beachhead. The chaos that ensued was a grim baptism by fire. The 29th Panzer Grenadier Division tore into Allied lines, pushing the 36th Infantry Division from strategic high ground. leaving infantry cut off and isolated. The deployment of tank destroyer units, intended as a mobile anti-tank reserve, was fragmented and flawed. Battalions found themselves completely out of the picture, attached piecemeal to various, often British, organisations, undermining their cohesion and effectiveness. 7 M10s were lost in a single disastrous armour push into Passano, victims of roadblocks, blown bridges, and swampy terrain that swallowed conventional tactics whole. The fight devolved into a brutal, close-quarters slugfest, where every man was needed. Cooks, clerks, and drivers were pressed into service, hastily forming firing lines, their desperation a testament to how close the Germans came to overrunning the beachhead entirely. Key positions like Altavilla and a vital tobacco warehouse became choke points, held by resilient Allied forces. It was only the rapid reinforcement, particularly by the battle-hardened 82nd Airborne Division under the command of Lieutenant General Mark Clark, that prevented a complete collapse. The beachhead, once a hopeful gateway, had become a precarious foothold on the brink. As the Allies pushed north from Salerno, any lingering illusions of a swift march to Rome evaporated. Kesselring, now orchestrating a fighting withdrawal, meticulously established a series of formidable defensive lines, Barbara, Reinhard, and the infamous Gustav Line, transforming the Italian campaign into a grinding war of attrition. The landscape itself became an enemy. The terrible weather and difficult terrain of the Italian peninsula, already well known for its mud and mountains, rapidly deteriorated in early October 1943. High waters and pervasive mud immobilized vehicles, turning every advance into a grueling ordeal. The psychological toll on the troops was immense. The slow march through this winter position became a grind of 3 months of heavy losses to enemy fire and to the elements. Lieutenants in 6 Corps saw 115% turnover, and the elements alone claimed 50,000 sick in 2 months. The relentless rain, the cold, the constant threat of landmines, and German artillery all conspired to wear down the fighting spirit. This was no longer a war of maneuver, but a relentless siege against an entrenched, methodical foe. The Germans, masters of defensive warfare, had painstakingly prepared overlapping strongpoints, concrete bunkers, and reinforced infantry positions, all sited for mutual covering fire. This unbending resistance, coupled with the brutal weather and terrain, quickly dashed any visions of a rapid advance on Rome. The attempt to break this stalemate came with Operation Shingle, the Anzio landings in January 1944. Conceived to cut off German forces and hasten the liberation of Rome, it instead devolved into a costlier spirit. Brutal stalemate. Major General John Lucas's cautious approach, prioritizing the beachhead's defense over an aggressive inland thrust, allowed Kesselring to swiftly deploy 12 experienced German divisions to contain the Allied forces. The beachhead became a prison of violent stalemate, where operations were confined largely to night, and men huddled in the basements of stone houses during daylight. Enduring a psychological strain that some likened to the Aleutian stare, the terrain was a German ally, soupy ground and the worst mud, since the disaster at Mejez El Bab rendered cross-country movement impossible, trapping Allied armour. German defences expertly exploited sturdy stone houses, ruins, and the labyrinthine network of canals and stream beds. Sergeant Dixon of the 894th TD Battalion experienced the brutal intimacy of this combat firsthand. Shot, he crawled forward, pretending to be dead for 45 minutes, as a German soldier stripped him of his helmet, carbine, and pipe, before he could finally escape into the night. The German counter-offensives, particularly the major assaults on February 16th and 20th, tested Allied defences to their breaking point. The controversial bombing of the Monte Cassino Abbey, intended to aid the Allied advance, inadvertently created stronger German defensive positions from the rubble. Tank destroyer crews, already adapted to acting as artillery, now innovated further, fashioning makeshift protection for their open turrets, and using their M10s as housebusters in the street fighting. But the grind could not last forever. A shift in command saw Major General Lucien Truscott Jr. replace Lucas. signaling a new, more aggressive approach. The successful breakout from Anzio in May 1944, dubbed Operation Buffalo, coupled with the final collapse of the Gustav Line, marked a decisive turning point. The long bloody road culminated in the capture of Rome. On June 4, 1944, it was a symbolic victory, a momentary respite, but one that came at an immense cost, underscoring the brutal realities of the Italian campaign and the unyielding determination required to fight through the grinding mill. The initial promise of Normandy, a swift breakout from the D-Day beaches, quickly dissolved into a grinding, claustrophobic nightmare. Tank destroyers, deployed in greater numbers than ever before, found their very purpose challenged by the dense, unforgiving terrain of the bocage. This crazy quilt of small fields enclosed by ancient earthen mounds up to 10 feet wide and 6 feet high, bristling with scrub and trees, created a seemingly infinite series of strong points. Visibility was often limited to mere yards, making maneuverability a death sentence. For TD crews, designed for swift, decisive strikes, in open country, it was like fighting blindfolded in a maze. Early encounters with Germany's formidable Panther and Tiger tanks brought a chilling realization. The M10's 3-inch, 76mm gun, touted by Ordnance as a wonder gun, struggled to penetrate the thick frontal armor of these new adversaries. Lieutenant General Eisenhower, far from the front, would later lament being always the last to hear the grim truth. On the ground, this translated into a sudden feeling of impotence for crews who watched their shells bounce harmlessly off enemy hulls. Lieutenant Wilfred Ford, commanding a platoon of M10s near St. Lo in mid-July, vividly recalled the terror of facing extremely well-camouflaged German panzers. The bocage made it practically impossible to tell where the fire originated, forcing Ford to innovate, personally accompanying infantry on reconnaissance and using noisy firing demonstrations to mask his vehicle's movements. Even when a Panther was finally knocked out at a mere 100 yards, it was only after Ford transmitting battlefield movement. 3-inch rounds had bounced off its armor. The cost was high. Ford's unit lost M10s to hidden 75mm rounds and suffered devastating casualties from a jammed gun. A stark reminder of the M10's vulnerabilities and the brutal intimacy of the hedgerow fight. Yet, a captured German Panzer Leertanker admitted, despite the M10's limitations, they did not like the TDs, a grudging respect for the tenacity of their opponents. Towed TD units in particular proved a tragic mismatch for this mobile close-quarters slugfest. Their M3 half-track prime movers were painfully slow on the narrow, winding dirt roads. Crews had to laboriously dig in their guns, sandbag positions, cut roads, and clear hedgerows just to establish a field of fire, making them vulnerable to infantry infiltration and flanking attacks. They almost did no tank killing, expending ammunition, primarily in indirect fire, and suffered minimal casualties only because they rarely engaged enemy armor directly. Infantry divisions, bearing the brunt of the close-in fighting, quickly realized the drawbacks to towed TD units and demanded SP battalions, prioritizing the faster, more adaptable self-propelled units in shipping schedules. The stalemate in the bocage, though hell on the American GI, also severely hurt the Germans, who lost thousands of officers and tens of thousands of men with few replacements. A critical turning point, almost miraculous in its simplicity, arrived with the Kulin hedgerow devices, quickly nicknamed rhinos, fabricated from steel girders, salvaged from German beach defenses and welded onto tanks and TDs. These crude but brilliant innovations allowed American armor to plow through hedgerows with hardly any loss of speed. This fundamentally changed the mobility advantage, granting American forces a decisive edge that had been held back for tactical surprise until Operation Cobra. On July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra shattered the bocage stalemate. Lieutenant General Courtinage's First Army launched the offensive with an unprecedented aerial bombardment. Over 3,300 tons of bombs and napalm rained down on German lines, a deafening, earth-shaking cataclysm that virtually annihilated the Panzer Lehr division, though at a tragic cost of friendly fire, including the death of Lieutenant General Leslie McNair. The ground advance was initially slow, but by July 27 the breakthrough became an unstoppable torrent. The rhinos, fitted to 60% of the tanks involved, turned the impenetrable hedgerows into mere obstacles, and Combat Command A of the 2nd Armoured Division was through German defences within an hour. The true exploitation of this breakthrough began on July 28 when General Patton's Third Army became operational. Patton, characteristically leading with his tanks, unleashed an aggressive, offensive-minded exploitation. His armoured divisions, with integrated TD battalions, achieved a lightning-speed advance across France. Tank destroyer battalions attached to these divisions enjoyed robust and effective integration. Often viewed as organic components, embracing the 3rd Armoured Division's spearhead patch, Captain Thomas Evans of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 4th Armoured Division, described operations on highways and paced roads, moving at such lightning speed that they often called for airstrikes and left mop-up operations to follow on troops. This was the war the TDs had been designed for, swift, mobile and relentless. As Patton's 8th Corps charged through Avranches on July 31st, crossing the Saloon River, the 4th Armoured Division lunged toward the town, the vital gateway to Brittany and central France. The 704th TD Battalion, with its M18 Hellcats, played a crucial role in securing this breakthrough. M18 crewman Roy Robertson recalled destroying 2 German tanks after one had knocked out 5 American half-tracks. Sergeant Roger Turkin, commander of an M18, earned a Silver Star for continuing to load and fire his gun after his crew was killed. The M18s also picked off 8 to 10 panzers and many trucks and artillery pieces. As the defenders tried to escape Rennes on August 1st, this rapid advance, however, created a dangerous salient, a thin corridor into France that Hitler, in a desperate gamble, sought to sever. Despite dwindling resources, Adolf Hitler insisted on a counter-offensive at Mortain in early August 1944, a desperate and ultimately futile attempt to cut the Allied corridor. It was the last major German armoured offensive in Normandy, involving elements of 4 panzer divisions collectively fielding no more than 250 operational tanks. General Oberst Heinz Guderian would later lament Germany's strategic choices, noting, while our panzer units still existed, our leaders had chosen to fight a static battle in Normandy. Now that our motorized forces had been squandered and destroyed, they were compelled to fight the mobile battle that they had hitherto refused to face. Allied air superiority and ultra-intelligence detected the German build-up, but the Germans still achieved tactical surprise under the cover of a thick fog. On the night of August 6 to 7th, the German attack began, preceded by a 75-minute artillery barrage. Lieutenant Elmer Miller's 3rd Platoon, Company A, 823rd TD Battalion, found themselves overrun in Mortain, but were determined to stick it out. Sergeant Chester Christensen of the 823rd meticulously sighted his gun, destroying 2 Panther tanks at close range. Lieutenant George Green, another platoon commander, was last seen backing into a doorway and firing a .30 caliber machine gun from the hip in Hollywood style before his capture. Lieutenant Francis Connors's 2nd Platoon, Company A, 823rd TD Battalion, heroically held Hill 285 against repeated German assaults, enduring both enemy fire and friendly British Typhoon aircraft attacks. Connors grimly commented, "We didn't have a friend in the world that day." Yet his platoon suffered fewer than 19 casualties. A German assessment confirmed that well-installed American anti-tank guns prevented at first every penetration of our tanks, acknowledging the towed 3-inch guns as a lethal weapon in their first real haunted test against a large armour force, acting like a steady shore battery. Their immobility, after revealing their positions, however, made them vulnerable. But their tenacity bought precious time. The German attack ultimately broke down, failing to regain the initiative. Recognizing the failure of the Mortain counteroffensive, General Bradley proposed a sweeping envelopment to Field Marshal Montgomery on August 8, aiming to trap the German 7th Army. Montgomery agreed, marking a critical turning point, from merely pushing forward to actively trapping the Germans. M10s of the 629th TD Battalion arrived to support hard-pressed infantry. 15 Corps began its advance, forming the wall of the pocket. Reaching Argenton by August 13th, Staff Sergeant Flynn of the 628th TD Battalion claimed their first armored victim, a Mark IV at 500 yards on August 11th, and Corporal Key, the battalion's only gunner from Chinatown in New York City, knocked out 2 more Mark IVs at 1,200 yards. The operation to close the Falaise pocket continued to tighten the noose. On August 14th, the 3rd Armored Division and 703rd TD Battalion engaged remnants of SS Panzer divisions. Corporal Joseph Uno of Company A, 703rd TD Battalion, destroyed 2 Panthers at 25 yards, but was tragically killed by exploding ammunition after dismounting to help enemy wounded. On August 19th, at 1600 hours, the Falaise pocket was officially closed, with the link-up of American and Polish forces at Chambois. The rat race of pursuit continued as the Allies squeezed the remaining German forces. The Lieutenant Delbert Rex Platoon, Company A, 773rd TD Battalion, assisted by Staff Sergeant Edward Land, orchestrated a devastating barrage that destroyed numerous vehicles of a mixed German column near Chaman. Sergeant John Hawke, a machine gunner, displayed extraordinary heroism by repeatedly climbing a knoll under enemy fire, to act as a human aiming stake for TD fire, guiding Lieutenant John Snyder's gunners and earning the Medal of Honor. The Falaise pocket resulted in the decimation of the German 7th Army, with 50,000 prisoners, 10,000 dead, and up to 500 tanks and assault guns destroyed or captured. However, Allied delays, particularly in Canadian advances, allowed a significant portion of the German 7th Army to escape, tempering the idea of a complete annihilation. The rapid advance outstripped pre-invasion logistical planning, leading to critical shortages of fuel and supplies. Forces often dangled at the end of a 500-mile supply line, reliant on efforts like the Red Ball Express, a crucial but insufficient lifeline. This logistical crunch became a significant limiting factor, slowing the momentum of the relentless pursuit. Lieutenant Jack Dillander noted the physical toll. The weather was hot, and the fumes from vehicles and no rest began to take their toll on our faces. Our eyes were in bad condition and our faces cracked and blistered so badly we could hardly open our mouths. The Allied advance finally reached the Siegfried Line, the West Wall, marking a stark shift from rapid pursuit to a more attritional phase of warfare. The rat race across France gave way to a grim slugfest. On September 12th, the 3rd Armored Division occupied Rottgau, Germany, reaching the outer glacis of Germany itself. 2 days later, the 3rd Armored punched all the way through both bands of the West Wall in its sector, a costly breakthrough where Colonel Leander Doan witnessed 7 of his M4 tanks burning among the pillboxes, which continued to spew death even after direct hits. The slow, tough going was exacerbated by the forbidding gloom of the Hurtgen forest. This penetration, though arduous, marked the beginning of the direct assault on German homeland defences, demanding a fundamental change in tactics from manoeuvre to grinding attrition. The relentless Allied advance, a rat race across France, had finally slammed into the outer glacis of Germany itself. Transforming into a grim slugfest, the German homeland was defended by the formidable West Wall, a labyrinth of concrete pillboxes, dragon's teeth, anti-tank obstacles, and skillfully camouflaged firing positions. Its walls, up to 8 feet thick, presented a daunting challenge, forcing American tank destroyer crews to adapt their doctrine. No longer solely mobile anti-tank platforms, TDs evolved into crucial components of combined arms assaults, often acting as assault guns, pounding pillboxes from close range and pinning down enemy infantry for infiltration. The air was thick with the armoured thunder of this new, more intense phase of the war, a deafening symphony of cannon fire and grinding treads. The tenacity of American forces was evident in the Lorraine campaign. In the thick morning fog of September 1944, near Lazy, American M18 Hellcats, despite being outgunned, proved their decisive effectiveness in close-quarters battles, forcing German panzers to confront the lethal speed and maneuverability of the tank destroyers. Days later, a turkey shoot engagement near Aracourt, led by Captain Thomas Evans, became a legendary display of tactical prowess. Well-concealed M18s inflicted devastating losses on a larger German armoured force, a victory so decisive that General Patton himself came to recognise the triumph, an implicit challenge to the notion that the Siegfried Line was an impenetrable barrier. American combined arms, including the highly adaptable TDs, were finding ways to penetrate and overcome these formidable defenses. A critical upgrade in firepower arrived with the M36 Jackson, standardized in June 1944 and appearing in the European theatre of operations by September. Equipped with the potent 90mm M3 gun, it could penetrate 3 inches of armor at 4,700 yards, a significant leap in capability against the heavier German Panthers and Tigers. The limited availability of hypervelocity armor-piercing HVAP ammunition for both 76mm and 90mm guns further enhanced American anti-tank capabilities. A much-needed edge as the fighting intensified, TDs proved their crucial adaptability across a spectrum of environments. In the brutal urban combat of Aachen, they became integrated elements of infantry platoons, pounding strongpoints and acting as house busters in the forbidding gloom of the Hurtgen Forest, described by General Omar Bradley as some of the most brutal and difficult fighting of the war. TDs provided morale-boosting fire support. Around Metz, they transformed into modern-day siege engines, their 90mm guns effective against the nearly impervious fortifications. Corporal Harry Dunnigan of the 813th TD Battalion recalled the harrowing experience of a tree burst over an open M10 turret, killing his comrades and forcing him to take command, a testament to the brutal realities of this diverse warfare. This flexibility, far beyond their original anti-tank role, underscored their indispensable value. But even as the Allies pressed into Germany, a desperate gamble was brewing. Unbeknownst to Allied intelligence, which confidently assessed Germany's crust of defense is thinner, more brittle, and unable to stage major offensive operations, Hitler had decided on a massive counter-offensive in the Ardennes. December offensive in the Ardennes work. 1944, Germany had delivered over 2,000 new or repaired tanks and assault guns to the Western Front, assembling 28 divisions for Operation Wacht am Rhein. On December 16, 1944, at 0400 hours, a sudden, intense artillery and mortar barrage shattered the pre-dawn quiet, catching Allied forces completely by surprise and cutting all wire communications. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. The initial German success was not solely due to Allied surprise. It was met by fierce, determined American resistance from the outset. The reliance on towed TD battalions, often deployed with forward infantry, proved a significant vulnerability against rapid armoured advances. Sergeant James Gallagher of the 801st TD Battalion Reconnaissance Section, captured and then miraculously escaping, raced back to warn of the approaching Germans, but many towed units found their 3-inch guns outmatched and their crews exposed. Platoon leaders quickly realized the non-mobility of the towed gun and the lack of armor protection for the gun crew were major liabilities. In stark contrast, the mobility of self-propelled TDs, like the M18 Hellcat, proved crucial, allowing units like the 811th TD Battalion to engage and destroy 10 German tanks in a single engagement, significantly delaying the advance. One of the most pivotal stands occurred at Krinkeld and Rocherath. The 2nd Infantry Division and supporting TD units, including the 644th TD Battalion, fought with grim determination amidst burning buildings, snow, and thick fog. Lieutenant Robert Parker, seeing 7 Panthers approach, secured a bazooka from a ruined barn and damaged multiple Mark Vs before organizing bazooka teams to finish them off. Private Henry McVeigh, acting as a gunner in an M10, destroyed the first of 5 Panzers, using HVAP rounds to knock out Panthers and Mark IVs. This fierce resistance critically delayed the German 6th Panzer Army, throwing it hopelessly off schedule. General Major Fritz Kramer, 6th Panzer Army Chief of Staff, later attributed their failure directly to tank destroyers and heavy resistance, sentiment echoed by General Oberst Sepp Dietrich, who privately concluded the offensive had failed by December 20th. The Battle of St. Vith, though a tactical defeat, proved to be a crucial strategic delaying action. The 7th Armoured Division and supporting TD units, including M36s from the 814th TD Battalion, held the town far longer than anticipated. disrupting the German timetable. On December 20th, M36s with 90mm guns successfully destroyed 5 German Mark IVs with just 7 rounds at dusk, showcasing the M36's potency. The tenacious American resistance at key points like St. Vith and Neuville directly challenged the myth of a swift and unopposed German advance through the Ardennes. As German forces pressed on Bastogne, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's defiant nuts reply to a German surrender ultimatum on December 22nd became a symbol of American resolve in the face of encirclement. A critical turning point arrived on December 23rd when the blizzard finally broke, and the skies cleared over Bastogne, allowing for crucial resupply drops and air support for the beleaguered defenders. Patton's Third Army, traversing over 1.6 million miles through blinding blizzards, executed a rapid counteroffensive, relieving Bastogne on December 26th. Further west on Christmas Eve, Major General Ernest Harman's 2nd Armored Division attacked Celles, annihilating the 2nd Panzer Division and elements of Panzer Lehr. General Bradley cited this victory as the high watermark of the German offensive, signaling the turning tide. The Battle of the Bulge, a desperate German gamble, ultimately failed. Tank destroyers were credited with destroying over 500 panzers during the battle alone, a testament to their significant contribution to Allied armor-kill ratios. The brutal experience highlighted the severe limitations of towed tank destroyers in mobile warfare, leading the army to convert remaining towed TD battalions to self-propelled formations, affirming the critical need for mobility and mission-type orders for effective armoured combat. The costly but decisive victory in the Ardennes proved to be Germany's last major offensive in the West, paving the way for the final push into the heart of the Reich. With the Ardennes offensive shattered and German forces in retreat, the final push into the heart of the Reich began. On February 23rd, the 9th Army surged across the Roer River, marking the official commencement of the last great Allied drive. Tank destroyers, far from being sidelined, spearheaded this advance, their guns providing relentless direct fire support, silencing strongpoints and clearing paths for the infantry. This wasn't merely a tactical move, it was the start of a headlong race. The pace accelerated dramatically. On March 3rd, when General Bradley unleashed Operation Lumberjack. This pincer movement, executed with dazzling speed and elan, utterly routed German armies and rapidly pushed Allied forces to the banks of the Rhine. Just 4 days later, on March 7th, an opportunistic stroke of fortune at Remagen provided a pivotal moment. The Ludendorff Railroad Bridge, miraculously still standing, was captured, bypassing months of planned crossings and opening a critical gateway across the Rhine. General Bradley's ecstatic radio message, "Hot dog, Courtney, this'll bust him wide open. Shove everything you can across it," captured the exhilaration and the sudden, breathtaking acceleration of the Allied advance into Germany. East of the Rhine, the war transformed into a relentless blitzkrieg of Allied design. Tank destroyers were no longer just anti-tank specialists. They were essential for exploiting breakthroughs and maintaining an unstoppable momentum. Integrated into combined arms task forces, they became the spearhead. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Spiess of the 773rd TD Battalion, leading his own task force Spiess, exemplified this adaptability, screening infantry flanks, clearing towns, and even personally flushing a German soldier armed with a Panzerfaust. M36 platoons, often operating with armoured cavalry squadrons, swept through enemy territory, their speed and assault fire leading to the surrender of hundreds of Germans in the Bingdin area. This was a war of relentless pursuit, where TDs were vital to keeping the enemy off balance. The encirclement and subsequent reduction of the Ruhr pocket in April 1945 delivered a crippling blow to Germany's remaining fighting capacity, trapping and capturing hundreds of thousands of soldiers and signalling the collapse of organized German resistance. General Feldmarschall Walter Model, trapped with his Army Group B, chose to shoot himself rather than surrender on April 21st. With German armor reserves dwindling to no more than 200 tanks or assault guns by May 1, 1945, the focus of TD operations shifted almost entirely. Their anti-tank mission diminished, but their value did not. Instead, They adapted, becoming indispensable in supporting infantry assaults, urban combat, and even reconnaissance and humanitarian roles. In cities like Nuremberg, a former site of Nazi pageants, the fighting was brutal. The 601st TD Battalion's 90s were everywhere, their powerful guns literally inside the windows of the Kraut strongpoints, blasting enemies hidden in cellars and rooftops. Staff Sergeant Bill Harper even dismounted his M36 to hunt a sniper with his pistol, a testament to the close-quarters desperation. Beyond combat, TDs restored order in the chaos of a collapsing regime. The 823rd TD Battalion's reconnaissance group, sweeping towards Magdeburg, found themselves mediating battles between Russian slave laborers and locals, dispersing looters in Braunschweig and ensuring starving refugees from a concentration camp train in Farsleben were fed. This adaptability, far from rendering TDs obsolete, showcased their vital and evolving contribution, debunking any notion that their role ended with the decline of German armor. The physical end of German resistance on multiple fronts was marked by symbolic link-ups. On April 27th, American forces met Soviet troops at the Mulde River, a moment of historic convergence. Days later, on May 5, 1945, at 16:15 hours, two American columns from the 5th and 7th Armies converged in the Brenner Pass, 8 miles inside Italy, signifying the complete collapse of the Italian front. The 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion, celebrating this victory, liberated and enjoyed champagne from what they called Hitler's cellars, a defiant toast to a defeated regime. The war in Europe concluded swiftly. On May 7, 1945, at 0241 local time, German representatives signed the capitulation documents. General of the Army Dwight Eisenhower declared the Allied mission fulfilled, and the war officially ended at midnight on May 8, a day universally remembered as VED, and midnight on May 8, a day universally remembered as VE8D, midnight on May 8, a day universally remembered as VED, at midnight on May 8, a day universally remembered as VED, Hal D. Day on May 8, a day universally remembered as VED, and who had endured over 515 days in direct contact with the enemy. The news was met with disbelief and immense pride. A soldier's letter captured the raw emotion. The war is over, and I am healthy and sound. Yet this joy was profoundly subdued by the absence of fallen comrades who had become like brothers. Fierce fighting persisted. Men continued to die, often after preliminary surrender announcements had been made. Tragically, on May 2, 1945, Lieutenant Joseph Keeby, a reconnaissance officer with the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion, died with 5 of his men near Scharnitz, Austria. A stark reminder that the war's end was not an instantaneous cessation of violence. Despite the ultimate dissolution of their specialized branch, Tank Destroyer Battalions achieved astonishing accomplishments. They boasted substantial kill counts, destroying over 500 panzers in the Battle of the Bulge alone. By April 28 of the battlefield Bessages, 1945, TDs in Patton's Third Army claimed the destruction of 686 tanks and 239 self-propelled guns. Units like the 703rd TD Battalion claimed to destroy 10 enemy tanks or SP guns for every TD lost for every. A testament to their favorable kill-to-loss ratio. Often while on the offensive, their human casualties were proportionally lower than other frontline units, indicating a degree of success in their protective and offensive roles. The formal dissolution of the tank destroyer force after the war marked the end of a specialized military branch. As tanks evolved to incorporate similar firepower and mobility, exemplified by the M26 Pershing, and infantry divisions developed integrated anti-tank defenses, the dedicated TD role was deemed obsolete. Yet, the tank destroyer experience provided invaluable lessons for the U.S. Army in mechanized warfare. It underscored the critical importance of adaptability, combined arms, and the unwavering bravery of its personnel, who, from the sands of North Africa to the heart of Germany, truly sought, struck, and destroyed. Though disbanded, the tank destroyer force remains a testament to a successful failure, a specialized arm whose unconventional adaptability and courageous service were instrumental in securing Allied victory, and courageous service were instrumental in securing an